Okay, yes, so thank you for being here. My name is Hannah and I am the Biological Records Officer at ESPIS. And today I'm going to talk to you about ancient woodland trees, some trees that are part of the survey form for the surveying as part of the Ancient Woodland Inventory project. And we're going to go through 11 different trees. And I will provide the slides afterwards and also a recording. So feel free to take notes if you'd like, but also it should be available to you after the presentation. Okay, so when we talk about IDing trees, what are we actually looking at? Some key features for tree identification are the leaf, so not only the shape, but the type, the texture and the colour. The leaf bud, the flower, the fruit, the bark, and then the twig and the branch. And you really have to piece the clues together you can find with trees. The more features you can see, the more accurate your identification will be. So those are the kind of things that we're going to talk about today. Let's jump right into it and look at our first species. This is the crabapple, one that might be familiar to people. So some key features are the shiny, smooth, oval leaves that reach up to about 6 centimetres in length and feature rounded edges with a notable pointed tip. The blooms of flowers are expansive and flat, displaying hues of white or pink with 5 distinct petals emerging around May time. So not quite out yet, but next month they should be present. So these trees can live for up to a century. Fully grown trees reach approximately 10 metres tall, and they have this irregular rounded form and a broad expansive canopy. Their bark is speckled and greyish brown, often develops these gnarled, twisted patterns that you can see on the photograph there on the slide, and frequently has lichens present on the bark as well. In winter, they're recognised by the short row of hairs lining the edges of their bud scales. So that's a key thing to look for in winter when the leaves aren't present. It can be difficult to separate from domestic apples. So you get these, wildings where they grow from discarded apple cores, and rootstocks can often survive after grafted trees die. So crabs are often spiny on their branches, on their twigs, where domestic apples are not. Leaf hairiness is not very reliable, as some of the other species that are similar to this tree can also have hairy leaves, but the size of the fruits are a good indicator. And it's definitely worth returning to visit a tree in autumn to check the size and shape and colour of the fruit to confirm which species you're looking at. So yes, you can see a few of the details about this tree in the pictures provided, but hopefully one that, if you saw an apple tree, you could figure out that it was an apple tree fairly easily, and then would just need to look for a few key identification features to figure out that it's actually a crab apple tree. Good, okay. Let's look at the next one. We've got Midland hawthorn. So the key features for this are the shiny 3-lobed leaves with the glossy deep green hue, and they range from about 2 to 6 centimetres in length. And the flowers form a cluster, creamy white in colour, although they can occasionally be tinged pink or red, and these tend to bloom around mid-April. So we're coming into the season for that. They form quite a large shrub and can grow into a small tree, reaching up to about 8 metres or even more. They have a dense thorny coverage, and the leaves are, yes, these shiny 3-lobed, glossy dark green leaves. In the winter, it's identified best by the spines, which emerge from the same point as the buds So you can see the top right picture has the twig with the buds on it. And spines are something similar to thorns, but they don't quite have the same length usually. Spines are usually a bit smaller, and they have a different kind of shape than a thorn. But you know, they're generally something a bit spiky or spiny. So those grow next to the buds in Midland hawthorn species. And you could confuse this species with common hawthorn. So the Midland hawthorn typically blooms 1 to 2 weeks earlier than the common hawthorn, and its leaves are shallowly lobed, cut less than halfway to the midrib, unlike the deeply lobed leaves of the common hawthorn, which are cut more than halfway to the midrib. So the lobes are kind of the indents, which you can see 2 of here on the slide, on that left-hand leaf picture, forming those 3 definitive lobes. And when we're talking about halfway towards the midrib, we're talking about the vein that runs down the middle of the leaf. So as you can see, the notches that come in to create the lobes aren't reaching halfway down or even further than that on the Midland hawthorn species, but in common hawthorn they will be much more deeply lobed. This is a shade-tolerant and tree, and often found in the understory of like woodlands. And common hawthorn rarely is found in this kind of situation, except where maybe hedges have been incorporated into secondary woodlands. Hybrids between the Midland and the common hawthorn are quite common, and they'll have these intermediate characteristics. So if you come across one that you're not quite sure about, it may be that you've come across a hybrid. Just something to note there. And the fruits of the common hawthorn usually have 1 seed, where the Midland hawthorn usually has 2 or 3 seeds. So if you squish the fruits between your fingers, you'll find the number of seeds, and that can also help with identification. I think I've included a picture of the common hawthorn leaves, so I'm hoping yes, there we go. So those leaves in the bottom left are actually much more deeply lobed than the leaf of the Midland hawthorn, and those are the common hawthorn leaves, as an example. Okay, next we're going to look at the spindle tree. So the key features of this are the leaves, which are shiny with a slightly waxy texture and with these small sharp teeth along their edges. Hopefully you can see the detail from the picture just on the bottom left there. The flowers emerge in clusters during May and June, each bearing 4 petals in a greenish white hue. So the top right picture demonstrates that quite nicely. You can see those very small flowers with 4 petals. This is a deciduous species native to the region, with mature specimens reaching around 9 metres. They can live for over a century as well. Its bark and twigs start off deep green, gradually darkening with age and featuring light brown cork-like markings. Typically, it doesn't develop into a single trunk, and its slender straight twigs bear opposite paired leaves. So when you're looking at the twig, the buds or the leaves coming off of that will be alternating up the twig. In the winter, it's distinguished by its striking pink fruits, which contain vibrant orange seeds. That's the picture at the top in the middle there. Along with angular green buds and twigs. You could possibly confuse this species with dogwood when the spindle tree is in leaf, but dogwood leaves do not have these small teeth along the edges, so that's a key feature to distinguish those 2 species. Okay, so that is the spindle tree. Moving on to another one that people may have heard of, the rowan tree. So the key features of the rowan tree are that the leaves are arranged alternately along the stem. They are pinnately divided into leaflets, with 5 to 8 pairs of leaflets arranged opposite to each other and one terminal leaf at the end. So what you're seeing in the bottom left-hand corner is classed as one leaf, and it's divided into these pairs of leaflets. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pairs of leaflets arranged in this opposite formation, and then the terminal leaf in the example given in the bottom left-hand corner. Each leaflet is elongated and oval-shaped and has these toothed edges as well. The flowers are clustered densely, with each flower bearing 5 creamy white petals. So I haven't got a picture of the flowers up close, but you can see that they form these flower heads in the right-hand picture. Mature trees have the potential to reach about 15 metres, and they can live as long as 200 years. The native species are usually found on drier or acidic soils, but there are a lot of trees planted outside of this range. Their bark has this smooth grey, silvery grey appearance, and the leaf buds are kind of this purple grey hairy bud. You can just see that in the top left picture there. The leaves are arranged alternately along the stem. So if we imagine this bottom left picture is one leaf, the leaflets are arranged opposite, but the leaves are arranged alternately up the stem. So there wouldn't be the equivalent of this leaf as a mirror on the stem. It would be, up. There would be one slightly up and slightly down from there on the left-hand side, if you see what I mean. They may appear opposite at a quick glance, but they should be alternate. Large clusters of the bright orange fruits are found in autumn. To ID this tree in the winter, the young twigs, which we can see in the top left, are initially hairy and later become smooth, along with buds covered in hair. The terminal bud, which is the one that's found at the end of the shoot, can measure up to 8 millimeters in length, while the lateral buds situated in the leaf axils typically bear 2 to 5 scales. So I'm not sure how closely you've ever looked at a bud on a tree, but they kind of have these layers over them which the leaves emerge out of, and we call those the scales. And you can usually find 2 to 5 scales on the buds of the rowan tree. It could be possible to confuse this tree with an ash tree or an elder. However, the rowan leaflets, which again are these pairs on the leaf, are serrated and generally have pointed ends, distinguishing them from both the elder and the ash tree. So having a pointed leaflet at the end is a key identifier for the rowan. Okay, looking at the next tree, we're on to alder buckthorn. So some key features of this tree are that the leaves are arranged alternately along the stem, so that's not opposite but one after the other up the stem, and they exhibit a matte green colour, oval shape, and measure between 3 and 7 centimetres in length, and they are slightly hairy. They have a rounded tip at the end and are tapered towards the stalk. The flowers, which emerge around May to June, are small and star-shaped, as you can see in the bottom right-hand picture, with 5 triangular petals, and they have this greenish-white hue. Each measure maybe 3 to 5 millimeters in diameter. So those are quite distinctive little flowers for the alder buckthorn, and it can take the form of a little kind of bushy tree, this species, and mature trees can be about 4 to 5 meters tall. The outer bark appears dark brown, while the inner bark reveals a vibrant yellow hue when it's exposed. The branches and the stems are smooth and don't have any thorns. The twigs are straight and smooth and have a purple-brown colour with delicate white streaks, and they also exhibit this alternate bud arrangement. So the bud arrangement and the leaf arrangement are obviously the same because the buds form the leaves. Each leaf arrangement has about 6 to 10 pairs of these lateral veins that do not curve towards the tip. So if we look at the picture on the left, you can see the leaf veins starting from the horizontal midrib. They go in a sort of straight line, the veins, out towards the edge of the leaf. They don't at all curve back round to point at the leaf tip. They just come straight to the edges. So that's a good way to identify this species. In the winter, when the leaves aren't present, you can look for presence of hairy buds which lack scales. Remember, scales are those little layered pieces covering the bud. And peeling back the bark exposes that bright yellow inner bark that I was talking about. It is possible to confuse this species with dogwood, which lacks the spines that the older buckthorn has. So the spines form as part of the twigs, and using those as an identification feature is key in the winter. You might also confuse this with purging buckthorn, and that's distinguished by its opposite leaf arrangement. So where older buckthorn has an alternate leaf arrangement, the purging buckthorn has opposite leaf arrangement. Okay, so that is older buckthorn. Moving on to the next species, we have wild cherry, another one that people might be familiar with. So the key features of wild cherry are that the leaves are this oval green and curved serrated edges, and they taper towards a pointed tip. The leaves can range from 6 to 15 centimetres in length, and each leaf stalk actually has 2 red glands at the base. So where the stalk is meeting the leaf, perhaps you can see in this photo, although it's not very clear, you can see 2 very small red kind of spots at the end, and those are the red glands. The flowers, which will be about 8 to 15 millimetres in diameter, bloom in April, and they have this cup-shaped form with 5 petals. They flower in clusters, and they can be of up to 2 to 6 flowers. The fully grown trees of the wild cherry can be potentially up to 30 metres in height, and they can live up to 60 years. They have this peeling bark with the purple-grey hue, and the horizontal banding that you can see on the bark is quite characteristic. The trunk is usually, regular and cylindrical. During the winter, the presence of those oval-shaped, large and pointed buds, which we can see in the top left picture here, they can help with the identification. So they're this brownish colour, and can be key for identifying during winter. It is possible that this tree could be confused with a few species, so we're going to go through them. The first is that it could be confused with the sour cherry tree, where wild cherry fruits have longer fruit stems, the sour cherry does not. So I haven't actually put an example on the slide, which I probably should have. But yes, the wild cherry fruits have these longer stalks. We can also distinguish wild cherry from the bird cherry tree, which, unlike the wild cherry tree, the bird cherry tree has leaves with these fine, sharp teeth on the edges, and the teeth have kind of pointed tips. So where you can see in the picture on the slide, the teeth of this wild cherry leaf are kind of almost curved at the end, whereas the bird cherry teeth are very pointed and come to a point. It may be also possible to confuse this with cherry plum, which has a different leaf shape actually. So you'd maybe be able to distinguish this more easily from the cherry plum. The cherry plum leaf has a shape where the top of the leaf towards the point is more rounded with less of a distinguished point as the wild cherry. The wild cherry has this very distinctive point on the end of the leaf, but the cherry plum does not. And the cherry plum leaf also becomes much more slender in shape, becomes thinner, leading up to the base. So where it's connecting to the stem, the leaf is actually much thinner. So that's something that you can use to distinguish those two species. And that is wild cherry. So looking at our next slide, I thought I would see what you've been paying attention, how much you've been paying attention, and see if you can name this tree. So you've got three options here. You've got the crabapple, Midland hawthorn, or the spindle tree. And the details that we've got are that its flowers appear from mid-April. It forms a large shrub that can sometimes grow into a small tree reaching about 8 meters tall. It has spiny twigs, and it has this 3-lobed leaf, which is glossy and deep green. So I'll just give you a moment to have a think about which option you think it might be. And this is in fact the Midland hawthorn, number 2, the Midland hawthorn. So it has these shiny 3-lobed leaves with this deep green hue, as I said. They're about 2 to 6 centimeters in length, and the clusters of creamy white flowers, they're either creamy white, pink, or maybe even red, and they bloom from mid-April. So yeah, hopefully you got that one. Next we're going to try to match the trees and the leaves. So again, I'll give you a moment just to have a look at that. Hopefully you can get the first one, which we just looked at, which is the Midland hawthorn. So we've just got the other two. So we've got the middle leaf, shiny and seem waxy, fairly dark green. They've got very small teeth on the edges, and they come to a point, but more of an oval shaped leaf. And this one is the spindle tree leaf. And then we've got this lower one, which the only answer left is crabapple, but again we've got the serrated edges that come to a point, and there we go. Okay, moving on, hopefully you were able to get those. Next we've got this purging buckthorn tree. So the key features for the purging buckthorn are that it has these shiny deep green leaves with toothed edges, and they take on an oval form that tapers to a point. The small flowers are yellow to green, and they consist of 4 petals. So you can see them in this bottom right hand picture. Quite small flowers, but you can see quite distinctively that they've got these 4 petals. Purging buckthorn trees can reach about 10 meters in height. They are characterized by this grey-brown bark and thorned branches. the conical black-brown leaf buds emerge on quite long stalks, and the leaves are arranged in an opposite formation, which you can also see on the buds, on the twig with the buds in this case. And they feature 3 to 5 pairs of curved veins which converge at the leaf tip. So if we look at the bottom left picture, we can see you've got the mid vein running horizontally, and then on this leaf you've got 2 veins on the top half and maybe 3 veins on the bottom half, and they all kind of bend back on themselves to point at the tip, and that's a good way to identify this tree. During the winter, when the leaves aren't present, the twig thorns and elongated buds with the scales closely pressed to the twig are a good way to identify this tree. And peeling back the bark exposes an orange surface underneath. So it has these sort of spiny branches, these pointed buds, and they're in kind of this opposite formation, which is very useful. This is also another species that you could confuse with dogwood, but that lacks the spines, and you could also confuse this with the alder buckthorn, which we just talked about a moment ago. But as I said then, that has the alternate leaves and buds, whereas this has the opposite leaves and buds. So that's a key way to figure out which species you're looking at of the buckthorn. Okay. Let's move on to the next species, which is the wild service tree. So the key features of the wild service tree are that the leaf buds, which you can see in the middle picture, sort of resemble small peas because they're rounded and green, and they emerge on these short leaf stalks. The leaves can resemble maple leaves, and they feature distinctive lobes which transition, and the leaves transition to a vibrant coppery red before they shed in autumn. The white clusters of flowers are on the tree, and they have each got these 4 or 5 white petals, but they also form white flower heads. So quite a lot of trees have these white flower heads, so figuring out what the leaves can tell you and what the buds can tell you, as well as the flowers, is very helpful. When fully grown, they can be about 25 meters in height. It generally favours dry acidic soil, the wild service tree, and its bark has this brown and cracked appearance with kind of square plates. The twigs, which you can see in the middle photo, are slim and glossy, and they have this grey-brown hue, and they're quite straight in structure. The leaves, which you can see on the left, have about 3 to 4 uneven lobes, which you can see 2 quite distinctive lobes in this picture on the bottom left, and then 2 smaller lobes towards the left-hand side of the leaf. And it's easily recognised in autumn, this tree, by the clusters of brown speckled fruits that it gets. I haven't actually included that many examples of the fruits because they're often coming in autumn, and we're trying to survey these trees in the spring. But I thought it would just be worth mentioning anyway. To identify the trees in the spring, it's best to look at the buds because they're quite distinctive. So they have, again, these smooth green rounded buds, and they don't have any hairs, so they can be quite distinguishable. They also have this alternate arrangement on the twig. It is possible to confuse this species with maple. Although they have similar leaf shapes, the leaves of the wild service tree don't have such distinct lobing as found in maple leaves. So I've actually included a picture of a maple leaf, which I'll just pop on the screen there. So as you can see, the lobes of the maple leaf go much further towards the midrib than the wild service tree leaves. And actually the leaves of the wild service tree are much larger than that of the field maple and other acacias, with larger leaves that are more evenly lobed. So that is the wild service tree. Moving on to the next species, we're looking at the small-leaved lime tree. The key features of this are that the leaves have this heart shape and they come to a pointed tip. They measure about 3 to 8 centimetres in length and are smooth except for this reddish brown tufts of hair present on the underside of the vein joints. So if you turn the leaf over, you'll find these little reddish brown coppery coloured hairs, and there's a good demonstration of that in the picture on the bottom right of the slide. The flowers are green-yellow and they have 5 petals that are grouped in clusters of 4 to 10 on a flower head. So you can see here in the middle photo, you maybe can't see the petals that clearly because there's so many stamen, but they are 4 or 5 petals to each flower. So this is a large deciduous tree and it has the capacity to exceed 20 metres in height, so quite large. Its bark has a grey to brown hue and it has a smooth texture which evolves into flaky plates as it ages, as you can see in the top right photo. The twigs are this brown-red shade. They can be shiny when exposed to light though, so that's quite helpful to know. In winter, the twigs also are more of this reddish hue on top and more of an olive green tone underneath, so it can be good to have a look at both sides. And these smooth shiny red buds that you can see on the slide here, they're usually about 4 millimetres and have 2 or 3 scales and are quite rounded, as you can see. So that's a good identifier in the winter. It could be possible to confuse this species with common lime, and the way to tell them apart would be that the tufts of hair underneath the leaf, between the vein joints, which is the bottom right photo that you can see here, on the common leaf, those would actually be white. And on another species that you might confuse the small-leaved lime with is the large-leafed lime. Now, as you may guess, the large-leafed lime has larger leaves. They're about 6 to 12 centimetres instead of the 3 to 8 centimetres of the small-leaved lime. But also, the large-leaved lime has white hairs all over the back of the leaf. So really that's a very good way to distinguish between the different species. Common lime is a hybrid and is quite uncommon in UK wild habitats. So really you might just be looking at a comparison between the large and the small-leaved lime species. Having said that, distinguishing from other lime varieties and hybrids is important. A true small-leaved lime species are discerned by that rusty red hair. And also the flowers, the flower heads, are held upright above the foliage, unlike other species where they have more of like a pendant bloom, and that can be quite common in the hybrids. So their flower heads sort of poke up above the foliage rather than hanging like a pendant. But really it's those red hairs on the bottom that are really good to remember. Obviously in the winter that makes it tricky because the leaves aren't present, so it might be worth visiting when the leaves are back for that species. Okay, looking at the next species, we've got the Guelder Rose. The key features for this are that the leaves are opposite on twig, broad and simple. They feature these 3 distinct lobes with coarsely serrated edges and occasional fine hairs on the underside. They measure about 5 to 10 centimetres in length and have this rounded base where it meets the stem. Noticeably, in May to July, the tree has these distinctive branched clusters of creamy white, although occasionally pink, flat-top flowers. Each cluster is surrounded by a ring of larger flowers, which are actually sterile. So you can see in this right-hand picture that you've got the small flowers in the centre of the flower head, but they're surrounded by these larger flowers in a ring around the outside. So this tree is a spreading deciduous shrub, and it grows upright similar to a tree, but it can only really reach the height of 4 metres, and it can spread quite wide, between 2 and 5 metres. It has some preference for chalky or neutral soils, but is often planted elsewhere. And the stems are greyish and don't have hair, making them quite smooth. The 3-lobed leaves, which we can see on the left there, have this leaf stem that features a central channel and a pair of round glands near the tip. So we don't have a good picture of it here, but you can almost see them actually on where the stem meets the beginning of the leaf at that rounded bottom. You can see 2 small glands down at the bottom there. In autumn, it has this very characteristic glossy red fruit, which you can see here in the middle picture. During winter, you want to look for green hairless buds with a pair of scales, so only 2 scales on the buds of the Guelder rose, which are usually tightly pressed against hairless twigs. It is also possible to confuse this species with the maple due to the similar leaf shapes, but the Guelder rose has those 3 distinctive lobes and are often softly hairy underneath, with this kind of wrinkled upper surface. So if you can think back to the example I gave previously, you'll see that the shape and the lobing is different to the maple. So that is the Guelder rose. Moving on to our next species, and the last one I believe. We're looking at the wayfaring tree. So the key features of this are that the leaves are large, they're oval, and they appear slightly wrinkled, which you can see quite well in the picture on the left. And they have these round-toothed edges. They are positioned opposite each other on the twig, and they have this dense covering of soft grey hairs on the lower surface. There are numerous small identical cream-coloured flowers with 5 petals on the tree, and they form this large flat-topped fragrant flower head. So another white flower head for you to remember. The wayfaring tree is a deciduous shrub and is capable of growing to about 5 metres tall. They favour chalky soils and they are occasionally planted elsewhere. The identification during winter is possible by distinguishing its pale yellow-green buds, which are positioned opposite each other, and they're snugly pressed against a slightly hairy twig. It could be possible to be confused with the Guelder rose, which we looked at on the previous slide, but the flowers of the wayfaring tree are all uniformly sized and the petals are uniformly sized within the flower head, whereas if you remember from the previous slide, the Guelder rose has those smaller flowers with smaller petals in the middle and then has that larger ring of flowers on the outside. As well as that, the Guelder rose exhibits palmately lobed leaves, where the wayfaring tree does not. Good. Okay, so that's what we wanted to go through, and just as a little recap, I thought we would try to remember which tree it was that we were looking at with these photos. So we've got, from the right, the bark that's grey-brown and smooth but develops these flaky plates over time. We've got flowers that have 5 petals that seem to be green, greenish white and hanging clusters. We've got these small heart-shaped leaves, those copper-coloured hairs on the under part of the leaf, and then these reddish-brown twigs with the round buds and about 2 or 3 scales on the buds. So have a think to yourself what this might be. And hopefully you are able to remember that this is a small-leaved lime tree. Great. So I realise I've thrown a lot of information at you just then. As I said, it will be made available in a guide as well, which you can refer back to. And this video will also be made available. A couple of things that I wanted to just talk through were some guides or apps or books that you can use. So let's have a look at those. We've got some recommended resources. So the first one I might say, if you're really trying to learn from scratch what you're doing when it comes to Tree ID, is that the Woodland Trust have this Tree Tools for Schools website. I mean, it's very, it's designed for kids, but that doesn't mean that it's not valuable, but that means it's very beginner friendly. It has lots of interactive activities that you can do on the website, and you can do common trees, leaf ID, twig ID, and it's just a very interactive and free resource, which I thought would be good for some people. Next is the Collins Complete Guide to British Trees by Paul Sterry. So this is also beginner friendly and has some good photos as a guide. Then we've got also a British tree identification app by the Woodland Trust. And again, this is beginner friendly and has a great glossary of trees with very useful photos of all the different features of the tree that we've just discussed, you know, the buds and the leaves and so on. But I have found that the tree ID can sometimes be incorrect if you're using the Identify Trees by Feature tool. So it has, you know, this key where you click through what features you've found, and sometimes it doesn't really give you the correct answer. But still a very useful free resource to have. The other ones that I could find which might be helpful are the Twig and Bud ID guide by the Woodland Trust, which you can see in the bottom right. It's just a very beginner friendly guide that's got all of the basic trees and bud IDs already on there for you. The next is the Field Key to Winter Twigs by John Poland. This is a more intermediate level guide and can be quite technical, but it's really good for IDing trees in the winter. And another ID guide for the winter is this Identification of Trees and Shrubs in Winter Using Buds and Twigs by Bernard Schultz. So that's another great identification guide, and that covers many more species, but the illustration keys, I would say, are more user-friendly in that guide than the previous one. So if you're interested in buying a book, it's not compulsory or anything, but if it's something that you might like to have a look through, or even borrow from the library if your local library has a copy, then that's another option. So I think that is it from me.